Hello everyone, this is Korosh Erfani and today is Tuesday, March 24, 2026. We are reporting 24th or 25th day of the war of Israel and the United States against Iran, and I am going to start with the news or the rumors that we have regarding kind of negotiations that are in course, or at least the preparation of negotiations. So we know that the United States suggested a proposal containing 14 to 15 demands, and now Iran is supposed to receive them and to answer them. So let's see what they are in order to evaluate if there is any chance for this kind of proposal, because we know that the United States tried really badly to get to Iranians. It was not on the other way around. Despite the fact that President Trump tried to present it as something that had been initiated by the Iranians. Iranians denied that and said that there was not such a thing. These are the Americans who are trying to see if they can find a channel to have the Iranian side, on the negotiation tables. So the conditions are not really very clear, but here, according to what is circulating here and there, we can see that U.S. is demanding of Iran. Iran must dismantle its existing nuclear capabilities. This is something that had been always and always among the requests of Israel. It's not United States that's talking here, it's Israel, and Iran always said no, and they want to keep, of course, a level of nuclear activities. So too, Iran must commit never to pursue nuclear weapons. This is something useless to say, because Iran said that it had never been looking for that. 3, there will be no uranium enrichment on Iranian territory. This is totally unacceptable for the Iranian side, because Iran has always said that it needs to have this enrichment activity for the scientific and medical function. So no way that Iran can accept that. For Iran must hand its stockpile of some 450 kilogram of uranium enriched to 60% to the International Atomic Energy Agency in the near future, in a timetable to be agreed. So Iran is not really opposed to that, but at the same time it wants to get a lot in exchange in order to do such a thing, because that's the result of years and years of efforts by the Iranians in order to get to 60%, which is also necessary for some industrial and medical cases. So they don't want to lose it immediately, and don't forget that that's one of the leverage that Iranians have, and they see that the other side is not able to go alongside of diplomacy, right? So that's why they want to have a kind of lever in order to negotiate better. So that won't be that easy unless Iran is very sure about the possibility of getting the points that are totally favorable for its future, for its security, in order to give to hand out these 450 kilograms. Then we have the idea of 5, the Natanz, Isfahan, and Fordo nuclear facility must be dismantled. These are and the result of the almost 30 years of Iranian activity in the field of nuclear, with more than between 100 to 200 billion dollars of investment. So there is no reason that Iran accept to put an end or dismantle, as they said. So these are, don't forget that, all Israeli requests. So then we have the IAEA, the UN nuclear watchdog, must be granted full access, transparency, and oversight inside Iran. So this is something that had been accepted by the Iranians in the frame of the JCPOA in 2015, and it was going on without any problem seemingly. But from 2018, when President Trump decided to get away from the JCPOA, of course Iran doesn't want to give the total access to this agency that proved to be somehow an espionage tool for Israelis. There were a lot of spies within this agency, visiting the different nuclear facilities in Iran, getting the information, and of course handing them out to Israelis and to the Americans. So that's why it's not that easy. Another one, 7, is Iran must abandon its regional proxy paradigm. So we don't know exactly what it means, but it looks like that it means that Iran must cut its relationship with whatever we can be proxies, or according to the Iranians, allies, regional allies. So there is no reason Iran accepts that, because it's a part of we can say foreign policy of the Iranian regime, right? So they know that they need effectively some allies in the region. They cannot count on the Arab countries. They cannot count on the states. Now we have the Mossad state in Syria, So that's why they want absolutely to keep the links with Hezbollah in Lebanon, with Iraq, Hashd al-Shabi, with the Houthi in Yemen, and there is no reason that they want to abandon such a thing. Then we have 8, Iran must cease the funding, direction, and arming of its regional proxy. We know that we said it's impossible. 9, the Strait of Hormuz must remain open and function as free maritime corridor. So as you can see, the Americans are trying to dictate how Iran is supposed to go over the control and the management of the Strait of Hormuz, as a maritime corridor. So why the United States must determine the system of management or the legal system of something that belongs to Iran. Right, the Strait of Hormuz is a part of the Iranian territory. Right, is in the maritime territorial of the entity that is called Iran. So United States doesn't have anything to do with that, but they are trying to impose effectively something for free, while in any cases across the world there is a fee, of passage. 10, from this part it becomes really unrealistic. Iran's missile program must be limited in both range and quantity, with specific thresholds to be determined at later stage. So which means that you must abandon completely the only tool that you have for deterrence, right? So you try to limit that, to dismantle that. We determine what you can have so that Israel can destroy you, so that Israel can wipe you out and whenever they want, right? Whenever the Israeli brothers want to come to you, to destroy you, and to completely vanish your country. So in order to do that, you have to limit your missile program. Then we have any future use of missiles would be restricted to self-defense. So we will determine what is self-defense is, and if you want to use a few missiles that we let you keep, it should be strictly for the self-defense. Otherwise, we will be not very happy. So these are 11 points that Iran is supposed to comply with in order to have some benefits. So look at the benefits now. The benefits are, first, Iran would receive a full lifting of sanctions imposed by the international community. So that's something we know, that the sanctions are under control of the United States. So full lifting means once you are subject to become a completely failed state with the 11 points that we are imposing to you, then as a failed state, of course, you can have some sanctions lifted. Like the case of the Iraq, for example, 23 years after invading this country, still some sanctions are there. Still, the oil income of Iraq goes first in the U.S. Treasury, and they decide how much they want to send as cash to the Iraqi government. So we know that these are just the words, not serious. The U.S. would assist Iran in advancing its civilian nuclear program, including electricity generation at Bushehr nuclear plant. So Iran fundamentally doesn't need really such assistance, because they have the contracts with Russia, and the nuclear plant of Bushehr is functioning right now in the frame of a long-term contract with Russian, and the Russians are taking care of that. So we don't know why the Iranians must prefer Americans over Russians, for example. And finally, 14, the so-called snapback mechanism, which allows for the automatic reimposition of sanctions if Iran fails to comply, would be removed. So this is also something superfluous, something made up by the European country as snapback mechanism. It doesn't have any legal authority anymore, any legal basis, because China, Russia, and Iran decided to sign an agreement almost a few months or 1 year ago in order to put an end to the legality of the snapback. Snapback is actually leverage of pressure by just the European country and the United States. It doesn't have any international law-based foundation. So as we can see, if really this text is the basis of these so-called negotiations, there won't be any chance to see such a thing move forward and get to any conclusion. So the reason is simple. These are not really American conditions. These are Israeli conditions stated and suggested by Americans. We know that Americans are for nothing in this story, right? Everything is set up by Israelis, and they are controlling the negotiations and the content of negotiations. And if they don't agree with just one of these 15 points, they won't really let the Iranians or the Americans get together and to have such an agreement. But already we have some preliminary formulation by Iranians with regard to what they want, and as you can see here, it's a matter of the things that are not at all in the same direction, in the same spirit that what we saw in these 14 points. For example, Iran is asking to closure of all U.S. bases in the Gulf, so no further attacks guarantee, end of Israeli strikes on Hezbollah, lifting of all sanctions on Iran, war damage reparations, and no restriction on its missile programs. Of course, beside that, we know that Iranians are asking for a new legal basis of control of Strait of Hormuz. They want to have the total control of that. They want to make money through that, and they want actually to get to something that would be completely different for what is right now, as they ask, the American ask, a free maritime passage. There won't be such a thing, because we know right now we have something like $2 million per tanker they are paying, and Iran is supposed to have an annual income of $80 billion per year just through that. And I don't know why the Iranians must deprive themselves from such a possibility just to please to Americans or to whoever. So when you put these two lists side by side, you can see that there is nothing, almost nothing, as the common denominator. So that's why the probability of getting to an agreement or common understanding of that is around zero. Now, there are other aspects that are interesting, because the Iranians said that we don't want any more negotiate with the two Israeli, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. Now the Iranians know that these two Mossad agents have been at the origin of giving the misinformation to Trump and his team in order to incite them, to attack Iran. Of course, at the behest of Israel, right, for the benefit of their original nation, because they have the American passport, they have the American citizenship, but they are fundamentally Israeli agents. So Iranians said that the Americans have to send the non-Israeli, and it looks like that they ask for having the discussion through J.D. Vance, the vice president, in order to change completely, the record and the framework of what is going on. Not even Marco Rubio, because Marco Rubio is also an agent of Israel, but for now Iran is considering the J.D. Vance as maybe a reliable person to whom they can talk. But we should know that this choice of the Iranians, I don't know if it's calculated, very subtly calculated or not, but it is triggering a kind of power struggle within those who could be the potential candidate for the presidential election of 2028. J.D. Vance is one of them, we can say maybe the most important of them, and beside that there is Marco Rubio. And we should think about who is the favorite of Israel, right? And Israel is, if there is an agreement that is not really satisfying the Israelis, they are able to thwart that. They are able to impede completely the process, to blow it off. And they are already saying it, this guy, one of the cannibals who is in the UN, Danny Dannon, Israel's UN ambassador, he said that we are not in this negotiation. We are not a part of these talks. And they said that if Israel will continue strikes in Iran and aims to prevent Iran from gaining nuclear or ballistic missiles capability. So which means that we are set, at a continuous war, an endless war. We don't know what is the negotiations, why negotiations. We don't have any idea about that. We are an entity that had been created to wage war, and if we don't wage war, we are going to die, right? We are going to disappear. So evidently, they are, continuing this war in a way or another, and of course, we must be interested in the reasons for which Israel cannot accept any agreement with Iran. Right? This is what I am going to explain. But keep in your mind that in order to have a deep understanding and realistic understanding of what is going on, what is taking place, we have to put aside, for the sake of analysis, some other theories or suggestion that start to spreading out through social media here and there, right? And I would like to get into specifics for some of them, at least two of them, in order to see that can we really analyze the situation thanks to our usual models and usual thoughts or not. For example, one of the ideas that is right now circulating everywhere is that everything that's happening is a part of a bigger, let's say, conspiracy theory, right? Is a part of a conspiracy. I mean, many people are saying that no, that's a conspiracy theory or but they said that no, we have already the experience. There are similarities between what's going on right now and what had been the, let's say, the preliminary, the first steps of what we got as the COVID-19 pandemic. So they are comparing these two and get to this idea that with these restrictions of transport, lack of food, lack of gas, and the recommendations to staying at home, working remotely, the things like that are reminding us that COVID-19 alike crisis has been, started. So there are a lot of arguments that are underpinning, this idea, and we have to account for. I understand that. But at the same time, I would like to underline a point that could be maybe interesting. It's not to reject this idea, that there is a kind of conspiracy behind that. It's not to reject that, but it's to be cautious about it. Why? Because when we are, bringing everything into the frame of this conspiracy, it means that the system, we don't know exactly what can be system, who can be, at the top of this system, beside those who have already started this war, right? But imagine that they are talking about some other elements, some other protagonists, some other actors who are, arranging everything, including, among other components, this war. So they are telling us that this war is not really a real war, and it's the necessary component to trigger a chain of events that will be, in order to set a new system up in which the people are, again, stuck at home. They cannot really move. They don't have anything, so everything will be digital. The digital ID, the digital payment. There won't be any money. The things like that. All right, we know all of this, and I don't say that it's just a pure conspiracy theory. It could be a conspiracy. It could be something like that, but the issue is very subtle here, and that's why we must talk on the grounds of the facts. All right? I think by suggesting this theory, we are giving the impression to those who are receiving that, to our audience, the impression that the system is really in control of everything, including this war, right? And they know what was being produced as the outcome of this war. They knew exactly the output, and they are organizing everything else, finance, the energy market, banking, and so on, including, of course, the distribution of the energy, distribution of food, agricultural activity, and so on. Everything now is in the control of system in such a way that they can create, for example, the artificial famine, artificial starving, in order to get rid of millions and millions of people across the world, and controlling the population, keeping the people at home, and controlling them through the networks and so on. But the question is, are they doing so really? Are they able to do so? They can do anything they want. So this theory is giving us the impression that there won't be any deficiency in their plans. There won't be any issue when they organize something. And I am totally in disagreement with this idea. In my opinion, they started this war with a completely different objectives, and these objectives are right now far from being achieved, and that's why they are scrambling, struggling to find a solution. And if we want to have an objective approach, we must take into account the facts, right? Let me first present a scheme about the objectives that they have by attacking Iran. This is what we know by following up, everything that Israel was doing from the last war, the 12-day war of June 2025, and afterwards. Okay? We know what Israel is in pursuit of. This is the objective, and the United States is just a functional, instrumental part of that. The United States is not determining the strategy of this war, the goals of this war. Is just an instrument. Really, we have to get a utilitarian approach with regard to the presence of the United States in this war. We must think about those who have decided, those who have planned it, those who have ordered it to the White House with the Epstein file, and got the involvement of the Americans. So this war has to trigger a chain of events that Israelis were ready to manage, right? Because they thought that if they can trigger just the first puzzle, the first piece of puzzle, in a domino effect, everything will be done one after another, in a stage, right? Step by step. But it's not the case. Look, Let's imagine this chain of events that Israel wanted to trigger, something like that. First, and during the preliminary attacks, in the first day, they wanted to remove the leadership. And this is what they did, right? By killing Khamenei as the supreme leader and lots of people with him, they thought that by removing the leadership, they can get the second step, which is the popular uprising. The Iranian people will get rid of the regime, right? That, according to the calculation of the Zionists, it was kind of obvious, right? And they thought this would be not only plausible and possible, but sure, certain. So once there is an uprising, there would be the total collapse of the Iranian regime, and once there is no more government, there is no more structure of political structure, security, it would be possible to trigger through the mercenary people over there a civil war. And with the civil war, finally, we can get the ultimate goal of Israel with regard to Iran, which is the disintegration, right? Total decomposition of Iran, balkanization of Iran, and then get control of the parts that are interestingly for the natural resources. This is what Tel Aviv wanted, and for which it planned maybe 2 decades of planning, organizing, spending money, and so on and so on, in order to get there, right? So, what did get, in effect, right? What was the actual outcome of this? Something totally, utterly different from that. Different, and we have to say opposed, completely in contrast with what here you can see as the pre-planned objectives of this war by Israel. When we see what chain of events right now is taking place, we can understand that they have lamentably, badly, deeply failed. Completely, because right now everything is leaning toward something that is a kind of nightmare. For who? For Iranians? Not really. For Israelis and for the Americans. And the facts are there to to prove this claim. Let me show you what kind of, instead of this fantastic and idealistic chain of events, what they get in reality. They get this one, guys. Look at that. So what is this? Now we know that once the war has been triggered, Iran started to attack the American bases in the region, and the United States is losing its bases, including in Iraq. Can you believe that after 23 years of being present over there, having military bases and a lot of other locations where the Americans were militarily or politically present, now they are leaving the country. They are completely going away with all the forces that they have. I am pretty sure at the given moment even there would be no diplomatic body of the United States over there. No embassy, no US embassy. Especially from today, because after Americans having attacked one of the bases of the Hashd al-Shabi is the paramilitary force that is now, from a few years ago, part of the military forces of Iraqi government. So Hashd al-Shabi is a kind of, we can say, National Guard, for example, in the United States. So last night the Americans attacked one of these bases, and today the Iraqi parliament accepted that from now on Hashd al-Shabi is legitimately authorized to defend itself. Okay, which means that they would be able to attack Americans everywhere. That's why there is an acceleration, of the fleet of the American from Iraq. Right? They are attacking, directly all the American bases across the Iraq, including in the Kurdistan, where they are largely with the Israelis installed for more than 20-25 years. Okay, so Americans are losing effectively their bases. Many bases in the other countries, in the Arab countries of the Persian Gulf, have been abandoned or are not functional or are damaged, and Iran is asking we saw that, right, in their conditions for negotiation, that United States has to leave completely these spaces, the region. No military presence of the United States in the region. So this is something completely different from what they wanted. Second, no more protection for the allies. We are talking about the Arab countries, which are the vassals of either Israel or the United States. We are talking about the countries that are not really able to defend themselves. They don't have the real armies. They have a lot of arms, but not armies. And of course, they are, now we know that they have been behind the scene, pushing the United States, paying the United States, or the people like Jared Kushner, in order to incite the Americans to get rid of the Iranian regime. Can you imagine that now that Iran knows that these people, these Arab leaders, have been acting like the traitors, of course, Iran would have a different approach with them in the aftermath of this war and in the light of the treason that they committed. Because President Trump today named them, named Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Emirates as those who wanted this war, those who pushed the United States for this war. Right? And now this is confirmed by the Russian intelligence sources, and they informed the Iranian government that this war had been backed by Saudi Arabia with funding from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE. And don't forget that this is just for your information. Most of them, most of this guy that you see here as the leaders of the Arab countries are from Jewish origin. Okay, Ben Salman or Ben Salomon, these are the guys who are considered as crypto Jew. These are the Jew that converted somehow to Islam in order to get, to the top of the hierarchy. This is what they do almost in many countries, including in all the countries with the Semite population. So most of the Arab countries' leaders are actually originally the Hebrew. All right. Now, can you imagine that once the United States accepts officially the loss and the defeat in this war, this is what they are going to have. This scheme is telling us that there would be no more protection for the allies. So these Arab countries would be alone with Iran in the region. But another element that is extremely important in the chain of effect, chain of events here, as the totally opposed outcomes of the Israel and United States war against Iran, is Israel's vulnerability. Israel showed that it's vulnerable, that from point of view of security, Israel is fragile and could be hit, in a way that is just unimaginable. We have more and more, visual documents that show the destruction of the different parts of Israel during this war, and according to some sources, we are getting just something like 5% of what is happening really in Israel. 5%, which means that 95% of destruction, damages, casualties are hidden, are covered by the military censorship of the by Israeli government, right? But we have a lot of information like this one just a few hours ago, that Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps announced it has targeted ALOT and satellite reception stations used to provide services to Israeli military. We have more and more images and news of those who are trying to flee Israel, in such a way that some sources are exaggerating about the numbers, but just to give you an idea about the rumors that are circulating on social media, they are talking about 5 million Israelis. They are ready to flee the country. Most probably, if the war continues, we are going to have more and more. We had already confirmation of something between 500,000 people to 1 million, fleeing the country, and it could go, to a huge number like this. So we have a lot of, as I told you, visual proof of disintegration, disintegration of fabric of society in Israel. The people are getting crazy. The people cannot really be with the pressure coming from continuous attacks of Iran, and they had to stop their life. They had to go all the time in the shelters. They cannot really be with that. You remember we said that the first time in 2025 they could really support it for just let's say 12 days, and now they cannot really be with that. Why? Because it's too much. These are the Zionists that are imposing such inhuman conditions to Israelis, to the majority of the Israelis. That's why the people are getting crazy, and we have more and more this kind of, abnormal behaviors of Israelis on the social media. Look at one of the posts by an Israelis. It says, anyone who thinks you can live like this for another week is living in a fantasy. Sure, people who don't have a bomb shelter attached and have to go up and down every time, that's just impossible. You can't sleep more than 2 hours straight like this, meaning you can't function. It's simply a physical matter. That's the state of affairs in Israel, if you want, right? And let's come back to this scheme. So we know that Israelis are losing everything inside the country, as so we know that internationally they lost all the legitimacy, reliability, and anything. Yesterday I said that it's now the most hated country on X, right? The people hate, a majority of those who are on X, Twitter, hate them, and that's why they cannot really be with that. Just in order to give you an idea about what could happen in Israel, Iran is feeling that Israel is going to commit a very bad action, making a very bad decision. Because with this condition, I told you, Israel is on the brink of implosion. And they know that once it happens, the Zionism will have the darkest future imaginable for ideology, for a filthy ideology. So that's why most probably, and I am really inclined toward this possibility, I think that's not really a far-fetched idea, that they try to do something very irrational. For example, bombing the power plants in Iran, bombing the, nuclear facilities like Bushehr, or maybe at the end of the day, nuke Iran. It's possible. That's why Iranians also are getting ready to strike differently Israel. So why I say so? Because unbelievably today something happened, which is 11 countries warned their citizens to leave as soon as possible Israel. 11 countries are evacuating their citizens from Israel, including China, India, Russia, the United States, United Kingdom, France, Germany, Canada, Australia, Japan, and South Korea. Don't forget that just for one of them, Russia, we are talking about something like 3 to 3.5 million people over there. So what's going on? What's going to happen? Why they want, all of them want to flee or to evacuate, if you want, Israel. What's happening? Here, another sign of something very bad that is most probably going to happen. A representative of the Israel Defense Minister Party has proposed Israel purchase islands in Greece for the good of the Jewish people. He suggested that we buy the islands, in order to bring the Israelis over there in case. So, which means that we can be sure Israel is not really anymore able to continue in a normal way to live without war. So it can wage war, it can continue war, it can expand war as it's doing in Lebanon, but this war with Iran is not going in a normal direction. And maybe one of the reasons there is a huge activity by the Americans in order to find a solution for this is really something like that. And look at that, just talking about the internal, about the Israeli implosion. Israeli journalist Amit Segal is telling us, soon I will publish an announcement that will shake the foundations of Netanyahu's administration. We don't know what's happening there. We don't have any reliable source that can tell us what is going on in the depth of the Zionist entity. But we can see through the effects, through the representation of this internal crisis, that everything is going wrong over there. And we know that such an entity cannot really be tenable, holdable. They cannot really keep going like this. So back to our scheme, as you can see, so with the Israel vulnerability on the one hand, and a very bad shape of the United States on the other hand, we can be sure that at a given, at a specific time, both of them are predisposed to accept to be defeated, that they have been defeated by the Iranians. They don't have any other choice. Look, here the New York Times report total confusion in the White House, telling us on the MSNBC that Trump is desperately begging for a way out of the war to save the markets, right? So that's why now the United States is begging what? Turkey, Egypt, Pakistan to step in and to mediate so that they can find a solution for this disastrous war. A war that is putting in question the whole entire global economy. Is it possible that at a given moment they accept, the loss of war, that they admit the victory of the Iranian? If it happens, we are going to have at the end here Iran hegemony. That would be Iran's hegemony over the region, over the Middle East, over the Arab countries, and from that moment Israel will be completely overshadowed and isolated by the increasing power of we can say post-war Iran, right? Because that Iran, we are talking about that in the aftermath of war, would be a country that will use this hegemony, this upper hand, militarily, politically, and even economically, because they can get billions and billions through the Strait of Hormuz. They can get hundreds of billions through the recompensation of the war's damaged, right? At a given moment, I am pretty sure that Iran would be able to dictate, the regional order, including for Israel. We know that such a thing is a real nightmare for the Israeli. We know that, right? So that's why I am pretty sure that Israel is going to do something extreme and stupid very soon. And I'm talking about just a few days. In the coming days, Israel is committing a very extreme action that will upside down the 7 days of war before. This is something sure. Can you imagine that right now the citizens of Kuwait are looking for leaving the country, by thousands and thousands. It looks like that they are scared that Kuwait will be one of the battles of this war very soon, once United States, with the order of Israel, try to boots on the ground in Iran in order to do something, maybe. And once we are there, can you imagine that the Iraqi Shiites are able to bring dozens of thousands of fighters and invade Kuwait? You remember Saddam did that? And they have this impression that Kuwait will be one part of the counterattack of the either Iranians or the Iranian proxies or allies. So We are in the frame of a regional war, and I can tell you with the news that was telling us regarding Israeli bombing the Russian ships in the Caspian Sea in Iran, in the Iran harbors. We have already the premises of a global war over there. I told you the let's say normal course of this war is just the war between Iran and Israel and the United States, and then the regional war, and then we are going to have an international war, and finally a global war. Right now we are transiting from regional war toward international conflict, with the participation of most probably Europeans, because they are coming. They know that the global economy will completely be dismantled very soon, collapsing. So that's why they want to come to see what they can do, for the purpose of, preserving something, because those countries also are on the brink of a kind of implosion. I am talking about the Western countries with the huge problem of energy and among others. So that's why I think we must not mistake another time and take this specific case as a general theory that can cover this case as well. This is really an analytical error, I think, right? The system has the control of a lot of things, of course. The system has extremely bad and nasty plan for the whole humanity. We don't have any doubt about that. I developed it in several videos before that in the past. But this time, and for this specific case, don't forget that we are talking about a plan that has completely defeated, a plan that didn't go in the right direction, and now United States and Israel have fallen in this quagmire, and they don't have any possibility to change fundamentally the things. And that's the reason obviously there would be a huge change through that. If those who suggest this theory want to say that the new situation will turn into a catastrophe, yes, I don't have any doubt about that, but saying that this catastrophe has been planned before, no, because they wanted to go to Iran in order to decompose Iran, in order to disintegrate Iran, and if necessary to completely dismantle Iran, to eliminate this country entirely. This is what they wanted. This is what they wanted for thousands and thousands of years, right? But they couldn't. They didn't succeed. They didn't get ahead, and now they are in a kind of impasse. They are in this quagmire, and every action, everything that they do, they sink more and more, deeper and deeper. So that's why we must be attentive about the analytical frame that we choose in order to understand that. I think beside all the negative aspects, there are positive ones, because for the first time the entity of Zionism is facing a real entity that is fighting back, is striking back. It was not the case for Gaza, it was not the case for the West Bank, for Lebanon, for Syria, for Libya, for Yemen, but for Iran, we can see that Iran is really hitting back, is responding, is reacting. And that shows effectively, that means the miscalculation of Israelis and Americans, and now they are trapped and they have to pay. They have to face the music. They have to pay a very, very high price for that. And let me tell you, if the war continues in this way, if Iran can resist a few weeks or a few months, for sure the Israeli entity will disintegrate, because with only 5-10%, according to some sources, those who are working on the coverage of what's happening in social media, they are talking about something like 5%. If 5% is so horrible that we can see through these visual documents, can you imagine 100%? Which means that something extremely bad is happening deep in Israel, and nobody knows that, right? Because Israeli cannot or don't want to talk about that and don't want to expose it unless some really responsible journalists start really to give more and more information about what is going on, and from that maybe we can get a better idea. But we can be sure that with the little that we know already about this, we are going to have a serious crisis in Israel. The same thing in the United States. Look at what's happening for the Americans. It says U.S. has just 2 months of rare earths left to replenish weapons among Iran war, which means that if the war goes for, I don't know, 3-4 months, the Americans won't be able to replenish the weapons that they are using in this war. You know, so if you put all these pieces, side by side together, you can see that the trend is leaning toward more and more catastrophe for the Zionist entity and for the American empire. Both of them are in deep crisis, and I think if we avoid for now, for the sake of having a better understanding of what's going on, of what is at stake, if we avoid the routine or the standard theoretical framework like the conspiracy, and so on, it would be better for us to have a more objective understanding of what is going on. And let me at the end remind you that on March 28, for those who are in the United States, there would be a march, and the famous march of no kings, no thrones, no crowns, no kings on March 28. So there would be a lot of action activities. This is a No King's Day action, and there are more than a few hundreds of different initiatives across the United States. You can search on the internet, you can get part, take part and engage in this activity. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope that you can help me for sharing this video with other people so that we can have more and more audience. Thank you very much, and see you in the next video.